My beloved child. Stop scrolling for just a moment. Something is waiting for you in these words, and I want you to understand something before you hear anything else. This is a fictional spiritual message created for inspiration and entertainment, written as though heaven is speaking directly to your heart. Now breathe. Put down the noise around you. Because in this story, something important happened today. And the person your heart has been connected to, your soulmate, has been carrying a sentence inside them that they have not known how to say. I have something important to tell you. Those were the words forming inside their mind. Not casually. Not because they were bored. Not because they suddenly wanted attention. Something happened today that made them look at your connection differently. And before this message ends, you will understand why. My beloved child, there are moments in life when everything appears completely ordinary from the outside. The same sky. The same streets. The same notifications. The same responsibilities. The same silence between two people who once seemed unable to stay apart. But heaven knows that some of the most important turning points do not arrive with thunder. They arrive quietly. A thought. A memory. A name appearing unexpectedly. A conversation that takes a strange turn. A message typed and deleted. A photograph looked at longer than it should have been. A person sitting alone at night, staring at a screen, wondering whether they should finally tell the truth. And today, something shifted. Your soulmate experienced one of those moments. They may not have understood it completely. They may have tried to dismiss it. They may have even told themselves, it doesn't mean anything. But deep inside, something awakened. And once the heart recognizes something it has been avoiding, it becomes very difficult to pretend nothing happened. That is where this story begins. Because earlier today, your soulmate encountered something connected to you. Perhaps it was your name. Perhaps it was a memory. Perhaps someone mentioned something that reminded them of you. Perhaps they saw something that suddenly transported them back to a moment they thought they had already moved beyond. And at first, they tried to continue with their day. But they couldn't. That moment stayed. It followed them. It sat quietly in the back of their mind while they spoke to other people. While they worked. While they laughed. While they tried to act normal. And eventually, they found themselves alone with their thoughts. That was when the emotional wall began to crack. Because there is something your soulmate has been unable to say. Something they have rehearsed privately. Something they have almost confessed more than once. But every time they came close, fear interrupted them. Fear of rejection. Fear of looking vulnerable. Fear that you might have moved on. Fear that you might not feel the same anymore. Fear that the truth would change everything. And yet today, that fear became smaller than the need to speak. That is the part you need to hear. Something happened today that made silence feel heavier than honesty. And when silence becomes unbearable, the heart begins searching for a door. Your soulmate may have opened their phone. They may have gone through old conversations. They may have looked at your photograph. They may have searched your name. They may have stared at the space where your conversation still exists. And then something unexpected happened. They began typing. Just a few words. I have something important to tell you. They stopped. Deleted it. Typed again. Stopped again. Because the words were not the real problem. The real problem was everything behind those words. The emotions. The memories. The regret. The questions. The possibility of finally admitting what they have been hiding. My beloved child, sometimes a person does not stay silent because they have nothing to say. Sometimes they stay silent because they have too much to say. And your soulmate has too much. They have memories they never explained. Feelings they never properly named. Moments they replay when nobody is watching. There is a particular memory of you that has been returning to them lately. They remember something you said. Maybe you didn't think it was important. Maybe you said it casually. Maybe you had already forgotten it. But they didn't. They remembered your expression. They remembered your voice. They remembered the way you looked at them. And today, that memory returned with unusual intensity. It was as though something inside them whispered. What if I misunderstood everything? What if I let something precious slip away? What if they were waiting for me to be honest? And then came the question that frightened them most. What if it is too late? That question stayed with them. And this is where the story becomes deeper. Because your soulmate did not simply think about you today. They began thinking about the version of themselves they became after you. They remembered how they used to feel. They remembered the confidence they once had. They remembered dreams they stopped talking about. They remembered a softer part of themselves that seemed to disappear when the connection between you became complicated. And suddenly, they realized something uncomfortable. They had been blaming circumstances for feelings they were actually afraid to face. They had blamed timing, distance, pride, miscommunication, other people, responsibilities, life. But somewhere underneath all those explanations was one simple truth. They were scared. Scared of how deeply you affected them. Scared of what your presence revealed about them. Scared that loving you would require them to become honest with themselves. And today, something happened that made running from that truth much harder. Maybe someone asked them a question. Maybe they overheard a conversation. Maybe they saw another couple. Maybe they received news that reminded them how quickly life can change. Whatever the trigger was, it created an emotional realization. Life is moving. Time is passing. And there are things that cannot remain unsaid forever. That realization shook them. Not because something terrible happened. But because something became clear. And clarity can be more powerful than fear. Your soulmate began wondering whether they should stop waiting for the perfect moment. Because there may never be a perfect moment. There is only the moment when courage finally becomes stronger than hesitation. And today, courage began rising. Slowly. Quietly. But unmistakably. That is why the words, "I have something important to tell you," became so significant. Those words were not merely about a message. They represented a decision. A decision to finally open a door they had kept closed. And you may be wondering, what could possibly be important enough to make them change? Stay with me. Because this is where the hidden part begins. There is something your soulmate recently understood about your absence. They thought distance would make the feelings disappear. They thought enough time would weaken the attachment. They thought they could simply move forward and eventually stop wondering about you. But something unexpected happened. The opposite occurred. The longer they tried not to think about you, the more often something reminded them of you. A song. A place. A phrase. A particular hour of the night. A familiar scent. A random conversation. Even ordinary things began carrying extraordinary memories. And today, one of those ordinary things became impossible to ignore. It reminded them of the way you made them feel. Not simply excitement. Not simply attraction. Something quieter. Something they could not easily replace. A feeling of being seen. A feeling of being understood. A feeling that perhaps someone knew the parts of them they rarely showed anyone else. And that realization frightened them. Because people can replace attention. They can replace conversations. They can meet new people. But sometimes they cannot replace a particular emotional connection. That is what your soulmate began confronting today. They started comparing what they have now with what they felt with you. And the comparison did not go the way they expected. They discovered that something was missing. They may have smiled today. They may have spoken normally. They may have appeared completely unaffected. But inside, they were having a conversation with themselves. And that conversation became increasingly honest. Why am I still thinking about them? Why does their name still affect me? Why do I still want to know how they are? Why do I still imagine what I would say if they were standing in front of me? And then came the thought that changed everything. I need to tell them. Not someday. Not eventually. Not when everything becomes perfect. But soon. Because something inside them was beginning to understand that postponing the truth was becoming its own form of pain. My beloved child, there is a reason this message feels unusually intense. It is because this fictional story is not really about predicting the future. It is about the emotional moment when someone finally becomes brave enough to confront what they have been avoiding. And your soulmate is approaching that moment. They have been standing at the edge of honesty. Today, they took one step closer. But there is still something holding them back. And that something is connected to you. They are afraid of your response. They wonder whether you would even listen. They wonder whether you still care. They wonder whether you have healed. They wonder whether you have met someone else. They wonder whether the door they once left open has already been closed. That question is haunting them. Because in their mind, they have created an image of you moving forward. Becoming stronger. Becoming happier. Becoming independent from the emotional connection they once believed they could control. And the thought of you being perfectly fine without them creates a strange mixture of relief and regret. They want you to be happy. But a part of them desperately wants to know whether there is still a place for them in your heart. That contradiction has been exhausting. And today, something made it impossible to ignore. They realized they cannot ask for an answer without first giving you the truth. That is why they want to talk. Not necessarily because they have every solution. Not because they suddenly understand everything. But because they finally understand that pretending not to care is no longer working. There is something they want you to know. Something they wish they had said earlier. Something they wish they could go back and explain. And the strange thing is, they have already imagined the conversation. They imagined seeing you. They imagined the first few seconds. They imagined the silence. They imagined you looking at them and asking, "What do you really want to say?" And in their imagination, they finally answer honestly. But then they become emotional. Because the truth they want to say is bigger than the simple words they planned. It is not merely, "I miss you." It is deeper. It sounds more like, "I never stopped caring." And even that does not completely express it. Because they are beginning to realize they didn't simply miss your presence. They missed who they were when they felt close to you. That realization can break through even the strongest emotional defenses. And today, it did. There was a moment, quiet, private, almost invisible to everyone else, when your soulmate stopped pretending. They admitted something to themselves. Something they had been avoiding for a long time. They admitted that they still care. And once they admitted it, another truth followed. They want you to know. That is the important part. They don't want this feeling to remain trapped inside them anymore. They want to communicate. They want to explain. They want to tell you why things happened the way they did. They want to tell you what was happening inside them when they appeared distant. They want to tell you why they sometimes disappeared emotionally. They want to tell you why they acted as though they didn't care when, privately, they cared far more than they ever admitted, but there is another layer. And this layer is the reason they have been hesitating. Someone else may have influenced their thinking. A friend. A family member. A person from their past. Someone who gave them advice. Someone who told them to move on. Someone who convinced them that reaching out to you would only create more complications. Your soulmate listened. For a while. But today, they began questioning that advice. Because other people's opinions cannot silence an unresolved heart forever. They began thinking. What if I listened to everyone except myself? That question changed their emotional state. They became quieter. More reflective. Less interested in distractions. And then they remembered something you once told them. Maybe you said, if you ever really want to talk, just be honest. Perhaps you don't remember saying it. But in this story, they do. And today those words came back. Be honest. That simple instruction became the key. They realized they didn't need a perfect speech. They didn't need an elaborate explanation. They didn't need to know exactly what would happen afterward. They simply needed to stop hiding. So they opened their phone again. Their fingers moved across the screen. I have something important to tell you. This time, they didn't immediately delete it. They stared at the sentence. Their heart raced. They imagined your reaction. Then they typed another line. And another. And another. But suddenly, they stopped. Because the next sentence contained the truth they had been afraid to write. They looked at it for a long time. Their eyes became heavy. They almost cried. Not because they were weak. Because some truths become emotional after being suppressed for too long. They erased the sentence. Typed it again. Erased it again. And finally, they put the phone down. They told themselves they would send it later. But deep inside, they already knew. The conversation had begun inside them. And it would not easily stop. My beloved child, sometimes the first message is not sent to another person. It is sent to ourselves. It says, I am finally ready to admit what I feel. And that is exactly what happened today. Your soulmate finally admitted something. But I will not reveal the full confession yet. Because there is another part of today's event that changes the meaning of everything. Something happened after they began thinking seriously about contacting you. They encountered a piece of information. A small detail. Something that made them wonder whether you might be thinking about them too. Maybe they saw something you posted. Maybe they heard your name from someone. Maybe they noticed something indirectly connected to your life. And suddenly their heart reacted before their mind could intervene. For one brief moment, hope entered. And hope can be dangerous when someone has spent a long time protecting themselves from disappointment. They began wondering. Could there still be a chance? That single thought brought back everything. The memories. The longing. The regret. The unfinished conversation. And then they became afraid again. Because hope creates a choice. If they reach out, they could finally receive an answer. But that answer might hurt. If they stay silent, they remain protected. But they may spend even longer wondering what could have happened. Today, for the first time, staying silent began to feel more painful than taking the risk. That is why this moment matters. They are standing between fear and honesty. And something is pushing them toward honesty. Not pressure. Not desperation. A realization. A quiet understanding that some connections deserve at least one truthful conversation. And now, my beloved child, I want you to imagine the scene. It is late. The world around them is quiet. The distractions have disappeared. The room is dim. Their phone is beside them. Your name is somewhere in their thoughts. They pick up the phone. They open the conversation. They scroll. They see old words. Old memories. Perhaps they smile at one message. Perhaps they become emotional at another. Then they reach the empty space where a new message can be written. Their thumb hovers. They breathe. And this time, they don't type. Hey. They don't type. How are you? They don't pretend this is casual. They type. I have something important to tell you. And even before sending it, they know this conversation cannot remain superficial. Because what they want to say is not small. They want to tell you that something changed. They want to tell you that they finally understand something about you. They want to tell you that the silence did not erase the connection. They want to tell you that they have been carrying words they never had the courage to speak. But there is one confession beneath all of those confessions. One sentence. One truth. One realization that they believe could change the way you remember everything that happened between you. They are afraid to say it. Because once they say it, there is no going back. And that is why they keep staring at the screen. They know the next words could change everything. They begin typing again. This time, they don't delete the sentence. They read it twice. Then 3 times. Their breathing becomes slower. They whisper the words to themselves. And suddenly, they understand that this is not about getting you back. It is about finally giving you the truth you deserved. That realization makes them emotional. Because they remember moments when you may have questioned your own worth. Moments when their silence made you wonder whether you mattered. Moments when their behavior may have made you believe you imagined the connection. And in this fictional story, they now realize. You were not imagining everything. You were not foolish for caring. You were not wrong to feel something. They simply did not know how to handle what they felt. And today, they finally admitted that to themselves. But there is still one final piece. The piece they have not told anyone. Not their closest friend. Not the person who gave them advice. Not anyone. Because it is too vulnerable. It concerns what they actually want from you now. Not what they wanted before. Not what they pretended to want. What they want now. They have been thinking about a conversation. A real conversation. No games. No pretending. No hiding behind casual words. No acting indifferent. Just 2 people facing what happened. And they are terrified of what you might say. But they are more terrified of never knowing. That is the transformation happening inside them. They are moving from, what if I get rejected? To, what if I never try? And that second question is becoming stronger. Tonight, in this fictional story, your soulmate sits with that question. They look at the message again. I have something important to tell you. And beneath it is the sentence they almost cannot bring themselves to send. Their finger moves toward the screen. Stops. Moves again. Stops. Then they remember you. Not the arguments. Not the distance. Not the confusion. You. The person who once made their heart feel understood. And something inside them whispers. Tell them. They close their eyes. Take one breath. Then another. And finally, they type the words they have been afraid of for so long. But just before they press send, something unexpected happens. A notification appears. Their expression changes. They stare at the screen. Because the notification is connected to you. And what they see there makes their heart stop for a moment. They read it once. Then again. They cannot believe what they are seeing. Because suddenly, the question is no longer whether they should tell you something. The question becomes whether you already know. And the message they were about to send may no longer be the biggest revelation of the night. Because what appeared on their screen next is something neither of you expected. And my beloved child. That is where part 1 must end. Because the next moment changes the entire direction of this story. They open the notification. They read the first line. Their hands begin to shake. And the very first words they see are, "I need to tell you something, my beloved child. If you are still here, then listen carefully, because this is where the hidden truth finally begins to come into the light." The notification your soulmate saw was not something they expected. They opened it with a nervous heart, wondering what could possibly be waiting there. And when they read the first words, everything inside them became still. It said, "I need to tell you something." For a few seconds, they simply stared at the screen. Their heart began racing. They wondered whether you had somehow sensed what they had been feeling all day. They wondered whether this was coincidence, timing, or simply two hearts arriving at the same emotional doorway at almost the same moment. But then they continued reading. The message was not a confession of love. Not yet. It was something much more meaningful. It was an invitation to finally speak honestly. And suddenly, your soulmate understood why they had felt so restless all day. They had been waiting for permission to stop pretending. Your message gave them that permission. They placed the phone down, covered their face with their hands, and took a deep breath. For the first time, they allowed themselves to admit the truth without fighting it. "I still care about them." The words were simple. But saying them, even privately, felt enormous. They remembered every moment when they had acted distant. Every time they wanted to reach out but stopped. Every conversation they replayed. Every night they wondered whether you had forgotten them. And then something even deeper came forward. Regret. Not regret for loving you. Regret for not being honest sooner. They realized that sometimes people lose precious moments not because they don't care, but because they are too afraid to reveal how much they care. And that was their mistake. They had protected their pride while sacrificing their peace. Now they wanted to change that. So they picked up the phone again. This time, they didn't overthink. They began typing. "I have something important to tell you." They paused. Then continued. "I don't know how you're going to receive this, but I don't want to hide anymore." Their hands trembled slightly. They kept writing. "I've tried to convince myself that I was completely fine. I tried to move forward without looking back. But the truth is, there are things about you I never stopped carrying." They stopped. Their eyes filled with emotion. Then they wrote the sentence that had been trapped inside them for so long. "You mattered to me more than I ever knew how to explain." They stared at the words. This was the truth. No games. No performance. No pretending. Just honesty. And before sending it, they added one final thought. "I don't know what happens after this. I don't know whether you still feel anything. But you deserve to know the truth." Then they pressed send. For several seconds, nothing happened. The silence felt enormous. They placed the phone beside them and tried to distract themselves. But they couldn't. Every few seconds, they looked back at the screen. Waiting. Wondering. Hoping. And then your reply appeared. Your soulmate froze. They opened it slowly. And what they read made their eyes fill with tears. You hadn't promised anything. You hadn't demanded anything. You simply said that you were willing to listen. Those words were enough. Because sometimes the greatest miracle is not immediately getting everything we want. Sometimes it is simply receiving an opportunity to speak. Your soulmate realized that the door was not completely closed. And that realization brought a peaceful feeling they had not experienced in a long time. They understood something important that night. Love cannot be forced. It cannot be controlled. It cannot be built on fear. If two people are ever going to find their way toward one another, it must happen through honesty, patience, respect, and genuine choice. So they didn't rush. They didn't overwhelm you. They simply told you what they had been carrying. They explained the misunderstandings. They admitted their mistakes. They acknowledged the moments when their silence hurt you. And most importantly, they stopped making excuses. That was the real transformation. Not the message. Not the notification. Not the dramatic confession. The transformation was their willingness to finally take responsibility for their own heart. And as the conversation continued, something beautiful happened. You both became calmer. The past didn't magically disappear. But it finally had a voice. Things that had once remained unanswered were finally spoken. Questions that had lived in silence finally received honest responses. And slowly, the heaviness began to lift. My beloved child, perhaps the greatest lesson in this fictional story is this. Sometimes the person we love is not waiting for a perfect sign. They are waiting for courage. And sometimes we are doing the same. We spend so much time wondering what someone else feels that we forget how powerful simple honesty can be. Your soulmate's important message was never merely about saying, "I miss you." It was about saying, "I don't want fear to control me anymore." That was the real confession. And whether this story reminds you of someone in your own life or simply touches something inside your heart, remember this. You deserve communication that brings clarity, not confusion. You deserve affection that does not require you to constantly question your worth. You deserve someone who can speak honestly, listen sincerely, and respect your heart. Never chase someone who repeatedly chooses silence. Never abandon yourself while waiting for another person's decision. And never believe that someone else's inability to express their feelings determines your value. Your value was never dependent on their message. Your worth existed before they noticed you. And it will remain even if their path changes. But in this fictional story, tonight brought something different. Two people who had spent too long hiding behind uncertainty finally decided to speak. Not because heaven forced them together. Not because destiny removed every obstacle. But because they finally understood that truth was better than pretending. Your soulmate looked at the final conversation one more time. A small smile appeared on their face. The fear had not completely disappeared. But courage had finally become stronger. They whispered, "I should have said this sooner." And somewhere beyond the noise, beyond the confusion, beyond everything that had remained unsaid, a new chapter quietly began. Not a promise of perfection. Not a guarantee of tomorrow. Just an honest beginning. And perhaps that is the most important message of all. What is meant to be meaningful should never require you to lose yourself. Let what is genuine approach with honesty. Let what is uncertain reveal itself with time. Let your heart remain open, but let your self-respect remain stronger. And if someone truly has something important to tell you, let their actions eventually give their words meaning. Because words can create hope. But consistency creates trust. And trust is where real connection begins. Tonight, your soulmate finally stopped running from the truth. They sent the message. You answered. And the silence between two hearts finally became a conversation. The future remains unwritten. But for the first time in a long time, neither of you is pretending anymore.